When we all arrived at Garden Lodge, I began to regret being there without cameras, as this really seemed to be a very special get-together. At the same time, I began to appreciate that Freddie asked me to come along, because that invitation meant that he saw me less as his director that evening and more as part of the inner circle. And that was tantamount to an accolade for me. The inner circle in London consisted of Jim Hutton, Freddie's partner, lover, husband, without a marriage license and dedicated gardener from Garden Lodge. 10 of those other men with whom Freddie was together every day and who also lived in Garden Lodge, Joe Fanelli and Peter Freestone, plus Freddie's bodyguard and chauffeur, Terry Giddings, who, however, drove home every evening after work. These 4 men, Jim, Joe, Peter and Terry, knew practically everything about Freddie, or at least very, very much. From getting up in the morning, or whenever, through the day and into the night. They experienced the funny Freddie, the excited creative Freddie, as well as the thoughtful or sad Freddie every day, whether they wanted to or not. Of course, Brian, Roger and John formed their very own inner circle with Freddie. That was a universe of its own, a planet of its own, on which only the 4 of them were allowed to land with their space shuttles, with the exception of Jim Beach, who was allowed to be a guest on this planet, and at the same time again formed a circle of its own with Freddie alone, about which only he really knows, as well as Mary Austin, who again had her own circle with Freddie. Also present that night were Spike Edney, a multi-instrumentalist on almost every Queen tour, and for me the 5th member of Queen without ever having been officially, Trip Calaf, who handled hundreds, if not thousands of Queen concerts as a mixer from FOH, in front of us, the central mixing desk at every concert. Crystal, Roger's man, and Jim, the Venny monitor mixer. And now there was suddenly little Rudy Dolezal, long-haired wannabe hippie from the 9th district of Vienna, who went out to conquer the world. Now I had arrived, or so I thought, in the Olympus of rock music, in the Champions League of superstars, not only as a spectator, and also no longer only as a director and filmmaker of the stars. I suddenly felt I really belonged. I began to belong more and more, especially with Queen and Freddie, and I wanted to grab this chance by the scruff of the neck at any cost. It was a moment I had been waiting and hoping for my whole young life. I didn't want to miss the chance. No, I wouldn't miss it. To enjoy it to the fullest. That's what I wanted. It was the first time that I was in the inner circle. It would not have been the last time either. There is only one document of this memorable evening, a photo taken by Peter Phoebe Freestone from the so-called Minstrel Gallery, a gallery above the sitting room. In this photo you can clearly see how much I had already reached for the full that evening. There are enough vodka glasses at the table, plus a grin on my face that tells me today there was undoubtedly more than just one line of cocaine in my blood. As you can see from Phoebe's photo, we were playing Scrabble, one of Freddie's favorite games when he had friends over. It is a game in which you have to form words, which of course became, shall we say, funnier as the alcohol and cocaine level increased. RDNZZL is not a word, said Brian firmly, when Crystal tried to get out of it with an extravagant word creation. Sure it is, Crystal persisted. It is a song by Frank Zappa. That is true, I agreed. I was rather out of it, but I knew a lot about Zappa. It has to be a word. A song title is not qualified, Freddie stated, once again playing referee and agreeing with Brian. Okay, so be it, Crystal conceded. Crystal was a strange bird, but I somehow thought he was cool. Balding but with long hair on the sides, he always knew where and how to get the best cocaine, but that wasn't the only reason why I didn't dislike him. And in Viennese one would say he had a good schmach. Can we move on, please? Trip intervened. Trip was also such a cool dude, but his extreme cynicism towards me was always rather dismissive in "what do you want, man?" kind of way. Besides, it was part of my job to always intrude into this area during concert shoots with Queen, and there were really quite a few of them back then in 1986, for Magic years. On top of that, I often wanted something at the most inconvenient times for him, such as during the soundcheck before the concert. Such as, can I have a line output from your stereo desk for my film crew? While he was busy with other, in his opinion, more important things. In and of itself, it was cool that Tripp always struck a handwritten note on his chair by the mixer in every hall or stadium in FOH that said, don't even think of touching or moving this chair. Very cool, I thought whenever I saw that, and it's etched in my memory to this day. Everyone, please look here, Phoebe called out to the group. He was standing on the last step of the stairs to the minstrels gallery and had his camera pointed at our illustrious group from above. Cheese, he was still shouting, encouraging a grin. I guess I took that a bit too literally, as is undoubtedly evident from my stupid grin in the now legendary photo. I love this photo. The special thing about it from today's point of view is not only that Peter managed to capture a magic moment, as I like to call it, but also the funny speech bubbles he added to the respective people. Even more so, of course, if you knew the people in question a bit closer. The speech bubbles were not written by Peter himself, but were store-bought forms which nevertheless described the people so aptly. As Peter explained to me later, Crystal was also involved in the successful selection of the sayings with a cynical humor, as you can tell. For instance, Joe Fanelli with a slightly smug look, who could work under these conditions, or Roger, just as often as me, maybe once too often, disappeared with Crystal to the bathroom and was therefore grinning rather unnaturally. A star is born, Crystal himself. They don't pay me to think. For Jim Hutton, who would often drink more than his share, guess who had one too many? Although he drank tea that evening, as you can see even in the photo, because the next morning he had to go to work. In other words, he had to go to work in a hair salon. And mine said, which way to Hollywood, as I grinned like a Cheshire cat. Roger winked at Crystal, the typical sign to retire for a moment. Roger, who was sitting at the table right next to me and Spike, in turn gave me a sign to come along. I gladly accepted the invitation, of course. Crystal was really not paid for thinking, as he put in his own mouth as a speech bubble, but mainly for the fact that there was always blow around, that is cocaine. We consumed that extensively, whereby I would like to emphasize that, of course, not all persons shown in the photo took drugs. For example, Brian was always an absolute drug opponent. Note also the seating arrangement that evening. Jim as husband next to Freddie, of course, as well as yours truly. Freddie obviously wanted us very close to him. In retrospect, I often ask myself how I was able to gain Freddie's trust so quickly. Some thought, then and now, that it had something to do with the fact that Freddie might have been interested in me, young and slim, in another way. I can only say this much. Firstly, I have never considered myself a good-looking man. On the contrary, I had a real complex about my long nose. Apart from that, I was so fixated only on women that men would not even have been remotely possible. Besides, Freddie never, and I mean never, made even the slightest allusion or hint in that direction to me. He was always an absolute gentleman. That evening turned into night, late night, and gradually the crowd thinned out. Brian and monitor mixer Jim Devaney were the first to leave. Roger, Crystal and I were the last.